They said my father died with nothing. My brother said it first, standing right there in the hospital hallway with a paper cup of bad coffee in his hand, not even waiting for the nurses to finish with the paperwork. He looked at me with that expression I had known my whole life. That patient, condescending look that said he already knew how everything was going to go. And I was simply too slow to keep up. He said, "Look, Dad had nothing. You know that. So let's not make this complicated." I nodded because I was too tired and too broken to argue. I had just watched my father take his last breath 40 minutes earlier, and my brother was already talking about not making things complicated. I should have known then. I should have heard the warning in those words. But I was 63 years old, and I had spent my entire life trusting my older brother. And old habits are the hardest ones to break. My name is Raymond Cobb. I grew up in Harlan County, Kentucky, the younger of two sons born to a coal miner who worked himself to the bone so his boys could have something better. My father's name was Earl, and he was the kind of man who never raised his voice, and never broke a promise, and never once told either of us that he loved us out loud, but showed it in every single thing he did. He fixed my bicycle at midnight when I had a race the next morning. He drove 4 hours round trip to see me graduate from a community college when I was 26, already late by most people's reckoning, still trying to find my footing in a world that moved faster than I did. He sat in the third row in a polyester suit that was 10 years out of style, and he clapped louder than anyone in that gymnasium. I never forgot that. My brother's name is Gerald, and he is 4 years older than me, and has been 4 years ahead of me in everything that is supposed to matter. He left Harlan County at 18 on a full scholarship. He became a financial consultant in Cincinnati, married a woman named Diane who collected grievances the way other people collect stamps, and built a life that looked, from the outside, like a catalog advertisement. Gerald always had the right car, the right neighborhood, the right firm handshake, and for as long as I could remember, he treated our father like a man who was mildly embarrassing to be related to, not with cruelty. Gerald was too careful for cruelty, just with a kind of cheerful dismissal, the way you might talk to a child who keeps telling you the same joke. I stayed. That is the short version of my story. I stayed in Kentucky, worked maintenance for the county school system for 30 years, married a good woman named Carol who passed from cancer 8 years ago, raised 2 kids who grew up decent, and moved away like kids do, and spent every Sunday having dinner with my father in the small house on Canary Road, where Gerald and I grew up. Every Sunday, for decades. Gerald came twice a year at Christmas and Thanksgiving, and he always found a reason to leave early. My father never complained about any of it. That was the thing about Earl Cobb. He accepted the life in front of him with a quiet grace that I have never been able to fully replicate. He tended his garden. He went to church on Wednesdays and Sundays. He watched the news and shook his head and turned it off, and every single Saturday morning without fail, for as long as I could remember stretching back to when I was still in elementary school, he got up before dawn, put on his good flannel shirt, made a thermos of black coffee, and drove his truck 43 miles north to a town called Berea. I asked him about it once, when I was maybe 12 years old. I asked him where he went on Saturdays. He ruffled my hair and said he went to see an old friend. I asked who the friend was and he smiled and said I would understand when I was older. I never asked again because that was the kind of answer that closes a conversation, and I was not the kind of son who pushed. Gerald, to my knowledge, never asked at all. Gerald was not particularly interested in things that did not directly concern Gerald. After the funeral, which was a modest affair at the First Baptist Church of Harlan, with about 40 people, and a potluck reception in the fellowship hall, Gerald and his wife took me aside. We sat in the church parking lot in Gerald's leased BMW, the engine running for the heat, and Gerald laid out his plan with the efficiency of a man who had been preparing it for some time. He said that since our father had no formal will, which he had confirmed with the county clerk before the funeral, the estate would pass equally between the two of us. He said the house was worth maybe $90,000 in the current market, that there was a small checking account with about $4,000 in it, and a savings account he had found statements for that held just under $12,000. He said we should list the house immediately, split the proceeds, and be done with it. I asked him about my father's personal things, his tools, his garden equipment, his Bible with the family names written inside the cover going back 4 generations, Gerald looked at me the way he always looked at me, patient, faintly tired. "Raymond," he said, "you can have all of that. It's not worth anything." Then Diane smiled at me with both corners of her mouth but not with her eyes, and I thanked them and got in my own truck and drove home to the house I rented 3 miles from my father's place. And I sat at my kitchen table in the dark for a long time. I was not thinking about the money. The money Gerald described was barely enough to matter, and honestly I had not expected more. My father had lived simply. What was gutting me was the speed of it. The clinical efficiency of a man who had just buried his father tallying up the assets in a church parking lot before the casseroles were even put away. I was thinking about all the Sunday dinners. I was thinking about 40 years of showing up. I was thinking about the way Gerald had said it's not worth anything about a Bible that had my grandmother's handwriting in it. I went to the house on Canary Road the next morning. Gerald had not been there yet. The key was where it had always been, under the ceramic frog by the back steps. Inside, everything was exactly as my father had left it. His reading glasses on the kitchen table, his coffee mug in the drying rack. The smell of his house. That particular combination of wood smoke and old paper, and something I could never name that was simply the smell of him being alive in rooms. I walked through slowly, touching things. I was not looking for anything. I was just saying goodbye. I found it in the bedroom, on the nightstand, which was the last place I looked because I had saved his room for last. It was his pocket watch, the one his own father had given him. A Hamilton Railroad watch, gold-filled case, worn smooth on one side from 40 years of being taken in and out of a pocket. I picked it up and opened the case. The watch face was cracked along one side, but it was still running, and taped to the inside of the case back, folded twice to fit, was a small square of paper in my father's handwriting. Not Gerald's name, mine. It said, "Raymond, Berea, Sunrise Storage on Route 25, Unit 14. The combination is your mother's birthday. You'll know what to do. I'm sorry I waited so long. Dad." I stood in my father's bedroom with that piece of paper in my hand for a very long time. My mother had been gone for 31 years. My father had kept her birthday as a combination to something he drove 43 miles every Saturday morning to visit. I sat down on the edge of his bed, on the side he slept on, and I held the paper against my chest. And I cried in a way I had not cried since Carol died. Not because I was sad, because something was beginning to come clear to me, and the shape of it was larger than I had been prepared for. I did not call Gerald. I do not know exactly why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the fact that my name was on that paper and his was not. Maybe it was something older than logic, some animal knowledge that the thing I was about to find was meant to be private, until I understood what it was. I drove to Berea the next morning, a Saturday, which felt right. Sunrise Storage was a low concrete building at the edge of town with a chain-link fence and a gravel lot. It looked like a place where people kept lawnmowers and old furniture. The gate combination was entered on a keypad, and I typed in my mother's birthday, month and day, and year. And the gate swung open. I found Unit 14 at the end of the second row. It had a padlock on it, and I typed the same 6 numbers and the lock opened. I pulled up the rolling door. I had expected boxes. Old furniture. Maybe tools or equipment from some hobby I did not know about. What I found was none of those things. The unit was clean and dry, and organized with a precision that spoke of decades of careful attention. Along one wall were stacked metal filing cabinets, 4 of them, with labels in my father's neat block lettering. Along the other wall were shelves holding binders, each one dated on the spine going back to 1987. In the center of the unit was a small folding table with a single chair, and on the table was a leather portfolio case. And on the portfolio case was a yellow sticky note that said, in the same handwriting as the paper in the watch, "Start here." I sat in the chair and opened the portfolio. The first document was a property deed. It was for 32 acres of land in Laurel County, dated 1989, purchased for $11,000. The name on the deed was Earl James Cobb. I turned to the next page. Another deed, 18 acres in Clay County, 1993. Another. A deed to a commercial building in London, Kentucky, purchased in 2001. Another. Mineral rights to 40 acres in Bell County. I kept turning pages. My hands had developed a slight tremor that I was not in control of. I spent 4 hours in that unit. I went through every filing cabinet, every binder. My father had been buying land since before I was born. Not expensive land. Not glamorous land. Timberland. Bottomland. Parcels outside of small towns that nobody wanted in years when nobody wanted them. He had done it with the discipline of a monk, recording every transaction in those binders in his block lettering, tracking every tax payment, every lease agreement, every timber harvest. He had leased the mineral rights to a natural gas company in 2008 for a sum that made my breath stop in my chest. He had sold 2 parcels in 2015 for prices I had to read 3 times to believe. At the back of the portfolio was a single sheet of paper, with a number at the bottom circled in red pen. It was the estimated current value of the remaining holdings, calculated by a property assessor in Lexington, whose name and firm were listed at the top. The date on the assessment was 8 months ago, when my father must have already known he was sick. The number was $4,200,000. I put the paper down on the table. I looked at the concrete wall of the storage unit. Outside, I could hear a car pulling into the gravel lot and a dog barking somewhere down the road. $4 million. My father, who wore the same 3 flannel shirts for a decade and drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it and brought his own coffee in a thermos because he said the gas station charged too much, had spent 40 years quietly buying pieces of Kentucky with whatever was left over after the bills were paid. He had not told a single person, not me, not Gerald, not anyone, as far as I could determine. He had simply driven here every Saturday morning and tended to it the way he tended his garden, with patience and consistency and no need for anyone's approval. I thought about all the times Gerald had talked about our father in that fond, dismissive way. Dad's simple. Dad never really understood money. Dad was happy with what he had. Gerald had been wrong about every single one of those things. I drove home. I did not sleep. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and the yellow sticky note from the portfolio table, and I thought about what came next. Gerald did not know about the storage unit. Gerald did not know about any of this. The bank accounts he had found, the $12,000 in savings, were probably just the household float. The real architecture of my father's life had been hidden in plain sight, 43 miles up the road, and Gerald had never thought to look, because Gerald had never thought there was anything worth looking for. By the following Tuesday, Gerald's patience ran out. He called me at 7 in the morning, which was early even for him, and he said the realtor was ready to come do a walkthrough of the house on Thursday, and that I needed to clear out whatever personal items I wanted before then. He said it in the same tone he used for everything, brisk and reasonable and slightly bored, as if we were scheduling a conference call instead of selling the house our father had lived in for 50 years. Gerald, I found something. In Dad's things. There was a pause. Short, but I caught it. What kind of something? I'd rather show you in person. Can you come down this weekend? Another pause. Gerald did not like coming down. Coming down meant Harlan County and unpaved roads and memories he preferred to keep at a manageable distance. But something in my voice must have registered, because he said he could be there Saturday morning. He arrived at my father's house at 9 o'clock, with Diane and their son, my nephew, a 28-year-old named Brooks, who wore sunglasses indoors and had never once asked me a question about my own life. All 3 of them. I noticed that. Gerald had not come alone. He had brought witnesses, or perhaps reinforcements. I let them walk through the house first. I watched Diane move through the rooms with her phone out, taking photographs, not for memory, for inventory. She opened cabinet doors and peered into closets. She picked up my mother's china and turned a plate over to check the maker's mark. My nephew drifted behind her, like a bored satellite. Gerald stood in the center of the living room, with his hands in his pockets, and looked around, with the expression of a man doing a mental calculation. "It's in better shape than I expected," he said. "The kitchen is dated, but we won't get more than 95, for it even fixed up. Market's soft down here." I said, "I know about the storage unit." Gerald turned to look at me. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. "What storage unit?" he said. "Berea. Route 25. Dad drove there every Saturday for 30 years. Diane had stopped moving. She was standing very still by the bookshelf with her phone in her hand. "I don't know what you're talking about," Gerald said, but he did. I could see it in the way he said it. The words were correct, but the delivery was a half-second slow, like a man reaching for something in a dark room and finding it just slightly off from where he expected. He knew something. Not everything, maybe, but something. "How long have you known?" I asked. Gerald looked at me for a moment longer, and then he made a decision. I could see him make it. He sat down on the couch, on the spot where our father used to sit on Sunday evenings, and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he said, "Dad told me there was some land, years ago. He said it wasn't much. He said he'd handle it. He told you, and not me. He told me there was some land, Raymond. That's all. I didn't know any details." He paused. "I assumed it was a few acres. Something nominal." "It's not nominal." The room was very quiet. Outside, a cardinal was making noise in the oak tree by the driveway. I had been in this house thousands of times in my life, and I'd never noticed how loud a cardinal can be when everything else is silent. "How much?" Gerald asked. I told him. The number changed the room the way a stone changes the surface of still water. Diane sucked in a breath. My nephew took his sunglasses off for the first time. Gerald sat back against the couch cushions and stared at the ceiling. Then something happened to Gerald's face that I can only describe as a reorganization. The older brother I had known my whole life, the patient and slightly condescending man who had always known better, rearranged himself into someone else. Someone faster and less careful. He straightened up and said, Okay. This changes things. We need to talk to an estate attorney this week. Equal split, obviously. That's what the law says. No will means it goes 50-50. We should get a joint appraisal done, get everything valued properly, and then we can figure out the liquidation strategy together. He said together, the way people say it when they mean under my supervision. "I'm not sure I want to liquidate," I said. "Raymond." He used the tone, the older brother tone I had been hearing for 59 years, patient and faintly weighted with the implication that I needed guidance. "You can't manage a real estate portfolio. You work maintenance for a school district. I have 25 years in financial consulting. The sensible thing is to sell, take the cash, invest it properly, and let it grow. I can manage the investment side. We'd both benefit." Diane had moved to stand beside him. She was holding her phone differently now, at a slight angle, and I wondered if she was recording. "I'd like to talk to an attorney first," I said. "My own attorney." "Of course," Gerald said immediately, agreeably, and smiled. "That's smart. We'll both get counsel. That's exactly the right approach." They left an hour later. I stood on the porch and watched Gerald's BMW back out of the driveway, and I thought about all the Saturdays my father had driven to Berea while Gerald was in Cincinnati talking about investment strategy. I thought about the folding chair in the storage unit, positioned in the middle of all those decades of careful work. I thought about my father sitting in that chair, and what he must have thought about. I thought about my name on the paper and the watch. I had a decision to make. But first, I had a test to run. I called Gerald that evening. I told him I had been thinking, and that he was probably right about liquidating, and that I was scared. I said the numbers were overwhelming, and I didn't know what I was doing, and that I thought the best thing would be for him to take the lead. I laid it on a little thick, maybe. But Gerald had always been willing to believe that I needed his leadership. I could hear him relax on the other end of the line. "That's the smart move, Raymond," he said warmly. "I'll get my firm to do the valuation. We'll use my attorney to handle the estate. Cheaper to use one, and he's very good. You'll barely have to do anything. What about Dad's wishes?" I said. "He left me the note. He left me the key." "That's not a legal document," Gerald said. "That's a note. The law is clear. Equal distribution. Dad should have done a will if he wanted things to be different. He didn't. That's not our fault." I said I understood. I said I was grateful. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the attorney whose card I had gotten from my father's property assessor in Lexington. Her name was Margaret Tully, and she had been recommended to me with 3 words. She is relentless. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Cobb, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning and bring everything from that storage unit." I asked her if she thought I had a case. She said, Your father left you a note by name directing you to an asset he chose to disclose to you, and not to your brother. The intent is clear, even if it's not formalized. The question is, what we can build around it legally. She paused. I've seen worse starting positions. I drove to Lexington the next morning with the portfolio case, and 3 of the filing cabinet drawers loaded into the bed of my truck. Margaret Tully was a small woman in her early 50s, with reading glasses on a chain and an expression of calm, absolute focus that reminded me of the way my father looked when he was fixing something broken. She spread the documents across a conference table and spent 2 hours going through them while I drank coffee. That was much better than anything I made at home. When she looked up, she said, "Your brother knew some of this." He said Dad mentioned land. Nothing specific. His son filed an inquiry with the Laurel County Property Records Office 11 days ago. She slid a printed page across the table to me. "Before your father died." I looked at the document. My nephew's name was on it. My nephew, who had never to my knowledge shown any interest in anything outside of a 60-mile radius of Cincinnati. "He was looking," I said. "He was looking," she confirmed. "Which means your brother was not being fully honest with you about the extent of his knowledge." I sat with that for a moment. The cardinal at the oak tree in my father's driveway. The way Diane had been standing with her phone. "What do I do?" I asked. Margaret Tully folded her hands on the table. "Your father's intent is documentable. The note in the watch, the fact that he disclosed only to you, the storage unit lease which is in his name, but for which he gave you, and only you, the access information. We can argue intent. We may not win everything, but we have enough to contest and enough to delay. And delay is expensive for everyone." She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "But the stronger play is the mineral rights lease." She pulled one of the binders toward her and opened it to a flagged page. "Your father signed a lease with a natural gas company in 2008. He received a substantial signing bonus and has been receiving royalty payments quarterly since then. Those payments are ongoing. The current value of the remaining lease term is approximately $800,000, and the royalties are in a separate account." She tapped the page. "That account is not in the estate. It is in a trust your father established in 2009. A trust with a sole beneficiary." She looked at me. "Me," I said. "You," she said. "Your brother never mentioned a trust to you. He didn't know about it. Or he knew, and hoped you wouldn't find it before he consolidated control of the estate." She said it matter-of-factly, without malice. "Just the shape of the situation, plainly described. Either way, that trust passes to you outside of probate. Your brother has no claim on it. The question is what you want to do about the remaining assets." What I wanted to do required me to first understand what I was dealing with. I drove back to Harlan County, and I went to my father's house, and I sat in his chair in the living room, and I looked at the place where he had lived his whole life, with his secret growing quietly in filing cabinets 43 miles away. I was not angry at him for keeping it. I had known my father well enough to understand that he had kept it safe the only way he knew how, which was by keeping it quiet. He had watched Gerald his whole adult life. He had made his assessment. He had left his note to me. The call from Gerald came 4 days later. His voice was different. Still controlled, but with an edge under it I had not heard before. Something bright and pressurized like a gas line with a hairline fracture. He said he had done some research into the estate. He said he had found out about the trust. He said, and I want to be precise here because the words were precise, "Dad made a mistake, Raymond. He didn't understand what he was doing when he set that up. The intent was obviously to provide for both of us equally, and the trust was just a vehicle he used without fully understanding the implications. We should honor his real intent and split it evenly." "What makes you think that was his real intent?" I said. "Because he's our father. He wouldn't favor one of us over the other. He drove 43 miles every Saturday for 30 years and never told you where he was going," I said. "And he put my name on the paper in the watch." "Raymond, he told you about some land," I said. "Years ago, you said. And you filed a records inquiry 11 days before he died." The silence on the line was the loudest thing I had heard in a long time. "Brooks did some research," Gerald said finally. "We were just being due diligent. There's nothing wrong with that." "You were positioning," I said. Before he was gone. That's not fair, Gerald, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I had thought this conversation would be hard. I had thought I would stumble over the words, the way I always stumbled when Gerald was confident and I was not. But I did not stumble. I have an attorney. Her name is Margaret Tully. I'd like you to have your attorney contact her about the estate probate. I think it's better if we do this formally from here. He tried 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. He called late in the evening when he thought I might be tired and less careful. He had Diane call once, which was its own particular kind of message. My nephew sent a text saying he hoped we could keep this in the family and that Uncle Raymond was being influenced by outside parties. I saved every message. Margaret told me to save every message. What I did not do was respond emotionally. I did not yell. I did not threaten. I did not tell Gerald what I thought of him. I simply let Margaret handle the correspondence and let the legal process move at the pace the legal process moves, which is deliberate and methodical and does not respond well to pressure. The estate settled 6 months after my father's death. The details are mine and I will keep most of them that way. What I will say is that my brother did not get what he came for. The trust was upheld. The mineral rights royalties were mine. A portion of the land holdings went into a separate arrangement that Margaret had structured with the creative precision of someone who genuinely enjoys her work. Gerald received his equal share of the probate estate, which was the house and the bank accounts. And he took it without the graciousness that would have made him look better in the telling of this story. He signed the papers, and he did not call me afterward, and I did not call him. I kept the house on Canary Road. I am living in it now. I painted the kitchen and fixed the leak in the bathroom that my father had been meaning to get to for years, and I planted his garden in the spring because the seeds were already labeled and sorted in his potting shed, and it seemed like a waste not to. The tomatoes came in better than I expected. I kept the storage unit too. I go there on Saturday mornings. I bring coffee in a thermos, and I sit in the folding chair, and I go through the binders and I learn. I am not a financial consultant. I do not have 25 years in the industry. What I have is time and patience and a decent attorney and the growing understanding that my father was not a simple man. He was the most sophisticated man I knew. He just did not need anyone to know it. The mineral rights account generates enough quarterly that I do not need to sell anything immediately. Margaret has connected me with a land manager in Lexington who handles the timber leases and the property taxes and keeps me informed without overwhelming me. I am learning to read the documents in those filing cabinets the way my father must have learned to read them, slowly and carefully, 1 page at a time. 3 months ago, I got a letter from a nonprofit in Berea, a housing organization that helps elderly residents in rural counties stay in their homes when predatory family members or financial pressures threaten to push them out. The director had heard about me through Margaret. She asked if I would be willing to meet. I drove to Berea on a Saturday morning with my thermos of coffee. The organization was small and underfunded and doing work that I recognized immediately because I had been, briefly, the kind of person they helped. An old person sitting in a house that someone else wanted, with no one in his corner and no document in his hand. I wrote them a check that morning that was larger than I had originally planned. Because sitting in that office listening to the director talk about the cases they handled, I kept thinking about my father and his folding chair and what he had been building in that storage unit all those years. And I understood for the first time what he had been building it for. He had not been building it for himself. He had not been building it to prove anything to Gerald or to anyone else. He had been building it because he understood something that took me until I was 63 years old to learn, which is that dignity is not given to you. It is not inherited automatically. It is constructed, carefully and quietly, one small decision at a time, until the day comes when someone tries to take it from you and finds that it is far heavier than they expected. I sat on the porch of my father's house last Sunday evening as the sun went down behind the ridge, and I had a glass of sweet tea and I listened to the cardinal in the oak tree going through his repertoire, and I thought about how different the house felt from the inside when you are the one who chose to be there. My father chose this porch every evening of his adult life. He chose these mountains and this road and these neighbors and this quiet, and for a long time, I thought that was the choice of a man who had settled. I know now, it was the choice of a man who had everything he needed and was smart enough to know it. I keep the pocket watch on the nightstand. I wind it every morning. The crack in the face catches the light in a way I have come to find beautiful. The way things often become beautiful once you understand what they have survived. The note is in my wallet. I moved it there after the estate settled, out of the watch case, into the place I keep the things I need to carry with me. My mother's birthday as a combination. My father's handwriting telling me I would know what to do. He was right about that. He was right about most things. I am still catching up to him. And I expect I will be catching up to him for the rest of my life. And I find that I do not mind at all. There are worse inheritances than that.